Okay, so welcome back, everyone. The afternoon is not so early anymore, but I'm still happy so many people are here and attending and listening to our session, because we are going to cover a very important topic. It's the Green Tech panel. We have heard in the morning quite some remarks about the 14th five-year plan, and also about the relation and connection with topics of environment, decarbonization, environment goals, and so on. So I'm happy that we can discuss this here in our panel. I have two experts here. Dimitri de Boer is Chief Representative of ClientEarth, which is a consultancy on legal aspects of on environmental questions. Welcome here. And Ms. Lisha Lu is working for WWF, and she is an expert on energy transition to renewable. And to add the practical aspects from the Austrian companies, I welcome two guests. Thomas Schmitz is from Andritz in Foshan. He is China President of Andritz, a very well-known Austrian company. And from Shanghai, I welcome Wang Jiasheng from EBNER Company. Welcome to both of you. Let me start with asking our experts on some insights before we start discussing. Dimitri, we heard about this all, the goals and the transition of energy and so on. So being a representative of an Austrian company, how much does this impact me? How far is it going to be? What can I do? How far will it develop? And later on, maybe we can also refer to the chances. Dimitri.
So thank you for that question, Birgit. And first, a small correction. ClientEarth is an NGO, so we're a non-profit, and we work with the Ministry of Environment and the Supreme People's Court on supporting this climate transition, especially with a legal focus. So I think that the real interesting question is how fast this is going to go, and how serious is the government about this, and what are the key forces that will affect this. So I'm going to try to predict the future for you, because we all want to understand what happens in the next couple of years. So I've asked to have this slide put on the screen, because it gives the best visualization of what I'm going to talk about. So we can talk about sectors, we can talk about problems and all kinds of fluffy things, but the most important thing here is data, the actual emissions of China, and we rarely see that curve because it's confidential. This data isn't really disclosed. The actual emissions of China are only disclosed at very rare intervals. So nobody knows exactly what are the current emissions, but they can be estimated based on energy consumption and other data. And so a very good friend of mine has done that. And we have here on the screen the secret, which is China's emissions curve. And so you see a solid line that ends somewhere in 2021. Which shows us an estimate of the actual emissions. And you see that the actual emissions are growing, and in fact they grew quite fast in the post-COVID recovery. So a lot of the economic stimulus has gone into business as usual sectors, which have heavy emissions. And so that has led to a very steep increase in emissions in 2020 and 2021. And it's still happening, actually, that increase. So what it means is that the 14th five-year plan target, which is to reduce carbon emissions intensity by 18%, if we make assumptions about economic growth, which may or may not be true, but we can make some assumptions, then we know what the maximum amount of emissions are allowed in the end of 2025. And this is very serious stuff. Chinese government doesn't mess around with this data. This is very serious data because internally there's now a leaders group formed by the vice premier specifically on energy on emission statistics. So you should not be too worried about this being what do you call it, incorrect. There are of course many inaccuracies in the data, but the effort is to make it as correct as possible. So the point that I really want to make here is this one. This point here, this is 2025. It's the end of the 14th five-year plan. And why is this point so important? It's because we know what the maximum amount of emissions can be under certain economic growth assumptions. And so I've marked it here at that approximate level. Now, so between here, where we are now, and here, this is all clear. As long as the Chinese government actually manages to achieve the target that I set for the 14th five-year plan, and I'm confident they will, because it's one of the only binding targets in the 14th five-year plan, binding. So that means it's completely binding upon the government to achieve this. It means that there's actually not much room for growth in emissions between now and 2025. So every time you read news about new coal-fired power plants or new emissions and other things, you have to remember that that doesn't matter actually. The total emissions cannot exceed this level. So what we have here is what I would call a peaking plateau, or a start of a peaking plateau between now and 2025. It's mathematically inevitable, okay? This is not my best guess or my wish or my hope. This is mathematics. I have all the assumptions on the internet. If you want to read it, just search my name. Now, the question in my mind is, what happens after 2025? So, will we go there? In theory, that's possible. Or will the, let's say, the peaking plateau lead to sort of a peak? And here, the Chinese government has not made any, let's say, hard commitments. It said, we will peak before 2030. I said before because it's before, not by. Okay? That means 2029 or earlier. And but the total level, there's some intensity target which is quite weak, which would allow for a lot more growth in emissions. So that's really bad for the climate, and also for your business, if you're trying to sell some climate solutions or other technology solutions in this sector. So what I hope is, and this is my hope, is that we will see this downward trajectory from 2025 onwards. Why do I think that that actually will happen? Is because it's not so easy to just, you know, turn the button and say, okay, let's make a bit more emissions or a bit less emissions, right? You're talking about the entire economic system of one of the largest economies in the world. This is not something you just turn up and down a bit. So once we see in the next few years that we are in this peaking plateau, which is inevitable, my assumption is that business capacity, local leadership, various sector associations, standards, regulations, you name it, will all be in place to continue that downward emissions trajectory. So that's my, the only point I want to make today about what to expect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. It's very interesting, and I mean, it leaves a lot of questions open, but I think we're going to discuss that later on. But it's a very interesting and challenging assumption. So what role might renewable energies play in this field? And also, is there any challenge and chance for Austrian companies or for European companies from this focus on maybe renewable or new energies?
Thank you. And first of all, I want to thank you very much for having this opportunity to be here. As the question for the opportunities for the companies in the energy transition and the renewable energy, I think there are two kinds of opportunities. The first one is about when we're doing as we all know, we have the 2030 action plan, and when we're talking about the target of the action plan, there is a very big target, about the renewable energy, which also means the wind and solar, which is 120 gigawatts capacity. And currently, actually, by the end of 2021, the actual number is the 63, I think 63 gigawatts. So that means for the next 9 years, they're going to be established or construction another half of the capacity for wind and solar for the next 9 years. So that means for the renewable energy, there is a very big chances for us to do the the cooperation with the China to do the capacity and to do the renewable energy related business in China. So I think this is the first layer. And the second layer is the challenges actually. When China going to reaching these targets for the carbon emission, that means China will strongly strengthen the control about their carbon emission for the manufacturers and for different industries, especially for the energy industry. So that means China actually for the MEE and also for the NDRC has issued several solutions or regulations about to ask the high intensity companies to report the carbon emission data, or to do the carbon disclosure. So this means a trend. Actually, the company will facing more and more regulations related to themselves. They need to thinking about the challenges they will facing in the future in China. That means the electricity has to be green if you are going to use green electricity, or you have to facing the emission. To setting up your own emission target, to trying to finding out different technologies to try different solutions to reduce yourselves the carbon emissions. So this is, I think that is two kind of opportunities or challenges for the companies in China actually in the future. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lu. Next, I come to Andritz. You are offering technologies from Austria, which can be used in various industries, which might be affected by the new regulations. So I wonder, how can Austrian companies help China in its efforts to improve the environment, and how can Austrian technologies be applied in China, especially technologies offered by your company, as an example?
Good, yeah, let me say a few words. I hope you can hear me well. And thanks first for inviting me to your panel. Andritz, of course, is since many years active in the fields of power generation by hydropower. But here in this respect with renewables, I think when you have wind and solar energy, one thing is that you generate electricity, but it is equally important that you store this electricity. And we have relevant technologies to really store this electricity to make it available in the grids of the, let's say, national grid providers. That is once pump storage projects, where we are involved as Andritz in China with our technology, and the others we have also some let's say development projects with respect to hydrogen from electrolysis, where basically the energy for the production of hydrogen is delivered by renewables, and hydrogen is basically a storageable energy which can be turned back into electricity or also into fuel. So these are relevant technologies which we both promote in the market, which are basically absolutely indispensable if you want to roll out renewable energies from wind and solar in a bigger scale. And in this respect, I think, and anything related to this kind of energy generation, I think Austrian companies have surely some contribution to make, because this is also, or most of these technologies are since many years already available in Europe and globally, and they are now rolled out, and that is the interesting part about China. They are now rolled out in a scale which has not been seen before anywhere else in the world. And that is another interesting aspect, is to say, okay, how to become really or producing these kind of technologies in a big scale, which is surely something Austrian companies need to think about.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmitz. The Ministry of Environment issued a guideline. They had a catalog of various industries, 14 industries actually, which will be in the first row, who has to reduce the emissions and has to change something in the system they're working. Many of those industries are customers of EBNER. EBNER Industrial Furnaces is actually covering industries like steel, aluminium, and copper. So my question to Mr. Wang Jiasheng is, what can EBNER do to help their clients to improve their emission situation?
Thank you, Birgit. Good afternoon to everybody, you lucky guys in Beijing. I'm sitting in Shanghai at home. Well, it's a very interesting topic. What on a national level regulated or going to regulate, or what Mr. Dimitri presented, or what the energy, how the energy is generated is a different story. But my story is how the energy is used. Yeah. Yes, we are producing furnaces, and furnaces, like every furnace, all the furnaces at home using energy. Yeah, our customers, they consume a lot of energy. So our customers are normally in the steel, aluminum, copper industries. They use a lot of energy. Energy costs money. Energy leads also to emission. Up to now, energy costs money, emission is still a question mark. So what EBNER is doing in this time, 5 years ago, we set a very ambitious target for our business. We say we are going to reduce the energy consumption and the emission from our furnaces by 50% until 2025. And then until 2030, we are going to supply 50% of our new facilities using climate neutral energy. And then until 2035, we are going to revamp all these facilities which we have supplied to the industry into use of climate neutral energies by 50%. By doing so, we are investing a lot of money in central R&D to research different technologies like burners, for example, like transition from natural gas burning to electricity heating. By, for example, using H2 hydrogen heating instead of natural gas. In doing so, we're helping our customers, also Chinese customers, to reduce their energy saving and reduce the emissions.
Thank you very much. Let me start with the questions the other way around. So I start with you, Jiasheng. Obviously, you can offer very good solutions, but what's the customer's reaction? I mean, those industries are often state-owned enterprises, and do they have the money? Do they use the money to spend on new technologies?
Good question. Yes or no? Yes or no? I mean, the awareness of energy saving and emission reduction is there by our customers. Okay, our customers. I describe our customers as very conservative industry where the steel industry, aluminum, copper, very conservative, needs a lot of money to invest. Yeah. Also, the people there are very conservative. Okay, the awareness is there, but to transfer this awareness into real action is really a different question, a different topic. Yeah. In the reality, we see that nowadays in China, many of our customers, they are not all, many, they are not really concentrating in finding better technologies, better production processes to reduce the energy saving, to reduce the energy consumption, to reduce the emission. But instead, they are looking for different regions where they can produce under a friendly political and regional policy setting. For example, different provinces in China, they have different emission control policies. They have different quotas. They have different kinds of energy. Yeah. For example, in the last years, in these years, a lot of new investment projects are going on in the Yunnan province, because in Yunnan province, they have quite different energy as in Jiangsu province or in Guangdong or in Shandong provinces. They have hydropower, yeah, and they should have also a different emission control system or a quota there. So many industries, many customers of us, they're moving their production facilities from coastal area to that area. Yeah, what they are doing is to looking for cost saving. Yeah, they are not really in the searching for higher technology, better production processes, but to a better, a lower cost area. This is also something is interesting, yeah, for us. So therefore, my personal opinion, before the regional differences in these kind of things are still there, before the emission or the CO2 trading system is still not in place, especially for our industries, this kind of moving will still happen from here to there. And the high technologies, better production process will be asked by customers, but for sure not by all customers.
Thank you very much. I mean, I can confirm your remarks on Yunnan. We were there just end of March with a delegation of Austrian subsidiaries here. And I was surprised. I had been in Yunnan last time in 2019. And it was amazing how many new industrial clusters were setting up there, photovoltaic, but also a lot of new plants in the steel, aluminium, copper industry. So there's definitely this kind of tendency of looking for new spots. I would like to ask our experts, what can the Chinese central government do to find some measures, or, I mean, not to contradict to this trend, but what can they do to put the companies on track to fulfill the goals?
I think about to making this kind of, how to say, for example, I think Mr. Wang talking about the carbon trading, yeah, because eventually I think there is a trend that for the companies, the carbon market, the green power market, and also even the green certificate market, it has to be a united one. So that means the pressure, I mean the emission pressure on the in their companies. So in the future they will have a kind of a better solution. pollution. Currently, maybe when they are facing the pressure of the emissions, for example, they have to transfer to the Yunnan province just for a better, maybe a cheaper price, maybe a greener, more green electricities, for example, the hydropower, and also maybe for the lower emission pressures from the government. But eventually, there is kind of an overall plan for the company. For example, I know that the different province has already made their own carbon action plan. I mean carbon peaking action plan, but they are not published. And eventually, I don't think they are going to publish that. But the central government already know the different province, what kind of actions that they are going to take. And I think they will have the overall plan of the whole country. So this kind of moving, I mean, from one province to another province, eventually this kind of trend will disappear. And instead, with united market, for example, the green power and the green certificate and the carbon together, the company do not need to move to another province. They can get the cheaper electricity. For example, we have the mechanism pilot kind of to buying the green electricity. I know in the Jiangsu province, maybe the electricity more, expensive, and also there is kind of lacking of the renewable resource. They cannot getting the enough green power. So now we are having the pilots. They can buy the green power from Gansu province or from Qinghai province, even from the Yunnan province. So with this kind of mechanism established and improving, so this phenomenon, I don't think that there will be more phenomenon like this. But of course, Yunnan is a very good province for the industry there, because they already have the cheaper green power, and also they have a very good environment. So I think this kind of thing will be better for a company located in different provinces to reaching the target, to have the opportunity to buy the green certificate and green power. Yes?
Well, it's a huge question, actually, right? And my sense is that, and I work very closely with the government on these issues, that basically everything that the central government can do is actually already being done in a quite a forceful way. And I would describe it almost as a war between the central government's efforts and the, let's say, local governments and a lot of sector, a lot of business interests, where there's heavy pushback and also a limited understanding. Perhaps also the incentives aren't quite there yet. Just to summarize some of the central government's actions on this, top-level political commitment, repeatedly expressed, central environmental inspection teams that have included carbon. Basically, all my colleagues in MEE that used to work on all these other environmental problems, since the last year and a half, the only thing they want to talk about is carbon, because that's their new big task. And so you'll see that everywhere. The 1+N policy framework is coming out so quickly that even I get confused. Like I have a colleague who spends a lot of time trying to assess every time a new policy document comes out, sort of how it fits into the framework and what does it mean, and does this really shift the targets or not? And so it's quite incredible, actually. My sense is that because the understanding, let's say, among the population, there's a lot of public support for air pollution and water pollution, and these things that people feel like they're directly affecting their health or their living quality. But actually, most people don't understand climate change in China. Like you talk to the guy in the Didi driver, sometimes, but sometimes not, right? Very often they'll quickly start, when you talk about climate change, they're like, oh yeah, like, air pollution is really important that we, but they don't get it actually. So I think that, and this is a, decently educated guy in the city, in Beijing, right? We're not talking about people out in the boonies. So yeah, it's difficult. That's why I'm saying it's a war, right? It's really difficult. There's so many interests at stake here. It's an exciting time, actually.
I mean, you were mentioning incentives. I was also asking around what's the incentives for those industries to improve. But seems it's just goals, but no incentives inside yet. What could the incentives be?
Well, I mean, clearly there is also a lot of work being done on incentives, right? I mean, the carbon market, for example, is coming together, and you know, part of it is also just approvals. I mean, you can't get your approval. That's it. You know, you can't do it. So that's the end of it. Like a lot of it is like that. It's command and control. Basically, in the short term, 90% of the power to change this is top-down, command and control. Yes, you can do this. No, you can't do that. So if you look at the NDRC's planning for that, they're used to that way of governing. That's normal for them. So, you know, like that's how it looks. And I personally think that there's a lot of potential in markets. But, you know, in the current Chinese policy context, especially, this is all heavy industry, SOE-dominated spaces, right? So for them, these political signals are as important as a market signal.
Thomas, would you like to comment on this? What's your experience with your customers?
Yeah, basically, I wanted to confirm what Dimitri said. I mean, we are very active in the pulp and paper market, and this is still a booming business. And in former times, it was always, of course, you need a production license, and then you need an environmental permit to run a new factory. But now, even most important has become that you get a kind of electricity quota, so that basically the local government is basically confirming to you the amount of electricity they will permit you to consume, and this has been becoming a tremendously limiting factor in our industry for any kind of new installations, where also people start to rethink, okay, how can I do things differently? How can I set up things with less usage of electrical energy, with less carbon intensity? So I think this is a very good driver in the whole industry, and this is really making the difference.
You were also mentioning before, in China you can scale up things like nowhere else. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on this?
Now, good. When you basically look into all the industries which we have seen developing in the last 20 years, and just take power generation industry, I mean, nowhere else can you see such a scale and such a pace on how things are rolled out than in China. We have seen this in the power generation industries, where they have rolled out 100 gigawatt of new power stations every year, and basically on cut and paste principles. And in the same way, I do expect that we will roll out technologies to store energy, same like they have rolled out a tremendous amount of renewable energy plants everywhere in solar and wind, which partly still need to be connected to the grid. So I do believe that basically from a technical and scaling point of view, China is very well able to do that. And I think this is always gives us a possibility to apply our technologies, but I also think we can learn on how to make things or engineer things in a scalable way, so that we can roll them out in a big scale, because this is one of the things where I always think China can teach a lot to us Europeans.
Thank you. I saw before there was already some question in the audience by our representative from First, Aogang Lian.
Steel division. Yeah, the one thing is that, of course, the government sets the guidelines, but we notice, as in First Alpina Steel Division, that also our customers, Mercedes-Benz or BMW, are setting targets for how much CO2 emission per ton steel we are allowed to have. And for us, it's quite a challenge, and we have a roadmap for that. But we see they always have an exclusion for the Chinese market. So they mainly focus it right now on Europe and North America, because we know in China, the blast furnace route is very strong. I guess Andritz and EBNER knows. So the steel production in China mainly is driven by the blast furnace route. So my question to Andritz and EBNER is, do you see that your customers, let's say Boer Steel or Shougang Steel, are investing or upgrading their lines to improve the CO2 footprint, or you don't see any investment in that regard?
Maybe Jiasheng, you answer first, I answer second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schmitz. My answer is yes. Yes, because two things. Number one, generally, I can answer you this question with not only Shougang, but also still with the Chinese companies. Yes, they are doing something. That's for sure. And especially number two, especially the state-owned companies. State-owned companies, like Mr. Dimitri said before, they are working not only on the market signal. They have very often administration key performance indicators. Yeah. Therefore, my answer to you is really sure. Yes, they are doing something like Bao Steel, like Shougang, especially Bao Steel.
Yeah, Mr. Wang said this perfectly. I have nothing to add. Actually, this was also my answer.
Question answered. Perfect. Are there right away some more questions currently, or no? No. There's a question.
I think you mentioned the beside the business, actually, the demand should also come from the consumers, from the people, the awareness of consciousness. And I noticed that there are some regulation already. I think also the party indicates that people should not waste food and all this. Do you expect there's more to come? Because I think this also drives and should drive then also the demand for more sustainable products, less consumption, not less waste on plastic and all this. Do you see that is coming? Because currently I think it's difficult for us really to see the consciousness, but it's, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I'm sometimes a bit surprised. Like in my conversations with government, I tend to emphasize this aspect more than they do usually. I personally think it's really important that people get it and want it and are convinced about it all. Because ultimately, all these decisions are made around the country at all levels, small ones, big ones, but you know, if government tries to kind of plan it all out and force it all down everybody's throats, you're going to get things backfiring, right? And we saw that last year with the energy shortages. The public perception is that that was very much linked to overly aggressive climate policies. So it's really important, in my view, that this is carried out. But I think the Chinese government also understands that sort of in the immediate term now, it's okay to try to just link, to kind of tag the whole climate package onto the environmental, let's say, momentum, right? To just say, okay, this is like 差不多, you know, it's you got air pollution and you got climate change and it's all green, right? And people kind of, because the public support for that is actually quite strong. But then I'm still concerned that we're going to see the wrong decisions being made on a local level. So we'll see. You know, there's so many policies and regulations are coming. We also worked with the National People's Congress, or indirectly, on, for example, a dedicated climate change law is very likely to come. Most other laws and regulations that are relevant will be revised in the coming years. We're doing thorough assessments of which laws are holding back the climate transition, right? Which are the other laws and you know, other incentives that are actually currently pushing the wrong direction in the system, and to try to mitigate those. That's extremely powerful, right? It's like the sort of the fossil fuels subsidies, right? That kind of thing. It's a big topic around the world now because, you know, we're trying to go green and we're constantly actually still pushing brown. So, you know, it's very schizophrenic, actually, the way we deal with these issues. So the more we can, you know, we don't actually have to push the green so much if we just cut all the brown. But, you know, it's complicated, right?
Thank you. In many industries, we face stronger and stronger competition by Chinese industries. So my question is also, how advanced is Chinese environmental technologies What's the competition? You were mentioning Chapudo. Is there also some Chapudo in the customer's point of view? Okay, I order something cheaper from China and it will be Chapudo. What's your experience from company side EBNER and Andritz?
Mr. Schmidt.
Yeah, good. I mean, I do believe, of course, the Chinese industry will develop, or it is developing actually quite well in accordance or in line with the overall development of the country. And this is, I would say, only right. You know, it's a big country, it's a strong country, it's economic country number 2, so it should have a strong local industry, and it's of course also clear that the local industry will go out. And I think we as foreign enterprises here in China, we need to face the simple fact that in one way or the other, we need to be able to compete with Chinese companies. So it's a natural process, which I do believe, and this is what I also propagate, helps us very much to gain globally competitiveness. So I would say the Chinese companies always set a good benchmark in terms of cost, in terms of pace. And I always believe this is something where we can only learn from, and which is also helping us to, so to say, become more competitive. So in a way, it's something I see generally as being very positive.
Thank you.
I agree with you, Mr. Schmitz. In my observations or in my experience, the Chinese competition is stronger and stronger. Especially, they are working really the philosophy of Chapudo or just for enough. That leads to solutions in China very often to just enough solution or appropriate solution. And it works. Or many times it works. Therefore, on the opposite side, we as European companies, we have to always ask ourselves whether we have developed something exactly the right thing for that market. That's the question we have to always raise to ourselves. Yeah, whether it's over-engineered or whether it is not suitable for this market. Yeah, we have to always raise that question. The competition, local competition is very strong. Yes.
Any more questions from the audience? Okay.
I wanted basically to add one of the things which Dimitri said regarding, let's say, the greenish idea in the general population, in the general Chinese mind, which of course is something we can activate. And I wanted to add, one of the things, of course, is you have energy, and you have air pollution, and you have water, and of course you also have waste, which is a big issue or has become a big issue. And everybody today knows that, for example, plastic is not good, and plastic is not good for the environment, but everybody is using a lot of plastic in the everyday Chinese life. I mean, much more plastic is used even compared to a lot of European households. But nevertheless, I mean, there is this push from the Chinese government to say, okay, plastic ban, substitute plastic, for example, with paper-based, cellulose-based products. And I think this is something which is also helping the industry to roll out more environmental friendly products, which will maybe not cut too much on the carbon emissions for, yes, anything produced out of paper is basically, it's a growing raw material, so it's basically more or less carbon neutral, different to plastic. But still, I think you can activate the green thought in the population, and step by step I can see this is more becoming a topic of daily discussions, at least in my environment, and I'm surrounded by a lot of Chinese.
Thank you. We have one more question from the audience.
What do you think, how much the threat, more or less, that the EU, for instance, will have a CO2 tax for imports, is this driving the Chinese industry that they are having more pressure to really adopt green tech? And do you see it probable that EU will really implement a CO2 tax? Maybe Dimitri knows this.
Yeah, I can speak on that. I'm also the team leader of the EU-China Environment Project, which is, having bilateral dialogues on this very topic. This is a very, let's say, sensitive topic because the EU is quite likely to proceed with this. And China so far has been quite clearly opposed to it. I've had many discussions with friends in the Chinese government who are generally, let's say, climate friendly people. But even they come out and oppose it. But others, I've seen a shift from maybe late last year until sort of the beginning of this year, where I see more and more of these friends starting to get it, actually, that this is actually a positive thing, not just for Europe's climate transition, but also in terms of how that will stimulate the Chinese climate transition as well. So I'm hopeful that gradually more support will be built within the Chinese government. Certainly it's something I work on. But I'm not entirely optimistic because these things can play out in all sorts of ways. Trade war, geopolitical, it becomes part of the bigger game, right? President Xi spoke about this in his call with Merkel and Macron, opposing the what he called unilateral trade measures that are intended to benefit the climate transition, let's say. So to change the opinion of the big boss, which is already spoke in public, is something that Chinese officials are very, very careful to do. Usually they don't want to contradict what the president just said, even if they get it.
Thank you. Now I have a question to all of our panelists. I mean, environmental protection is always a question of investment, money, money, money. So would you see that this kind of situation, this kind of legal requirements poses more challenges and risks, or is there more gains and chances? Who wants to start? Maybe Ms.
Maybe I start as, let me say, generally, to make this simple, it has both, of course. It will put pressure on certain industries, and it will benefit other industries. If we look onto the general picture that in developed countries the industries anyway change, and you see that when, so to say, the energy intensive industries, they move out, they move to other places and so on. Overall, let's say for the global climate, it stays the same. But generally in China speaking, I would say it's both. And some of the industry will suffer more and some of the industry will benefit. So it will be a good balance. But overall, I think the country will gain.
Thank you. Jiasheng, what's your opinion?
As also in the name of a technology company, like I would say also opportunity and challenge as well at the same time. A lot of opportunities for us, especially in the long term, but in the short term, maybe more challenge. Yeah, I see that. But for the nation, I'm sure it is a really opportunity for China.
The comments from our experts?
Well, I showed you the curve, right? And the curve keeps going to 2060. So as a business, I think it's really up to you to position yourself in that space where you're in for all the opportunities and where you can, wind down things that are in the challenges bucket.
Ms. Lu?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with these two gentlemen, Mr. Wang Jiasheng and Mr. Schmitz. Yeah, I think even for in current situation, there are several industries that are really gaining from the carbon emissions. I mean, the 30 targets, I mean, the whole situation. For example, for the renewable energy industry and also the low carbon technologies development or the researchers. Actually, it is true that we're helping some technology development companies. I mean, the communication between China and other countries, for example, the America and other countries, they are doing the technology exchanging. So there are several industries that are really interested in the technologies. So for in this way, for the hydrogen, for the energy storage, for this industry, of course, there's a big opportunities. But for the others, I mean, for the high intensity industries, for example, the copper, the coal power, the coal, that will be a tough time. And also, this tough time will go in very long because it's kind of an energy transition time. So the big, the target is there. The coal has to reduce and the renewable energy has to be increased. So I think that is very clear. Yeah.
One last question. Is China some kind of island with her plans for 2030, 2060, or does the global situation have an impact on China's goals and the performance of the goals? Global politics, also global economy, and also, of course, the pandemic. Would anyone like to comment on that?
I'll have a quick go. I mean, I think I'm sometimes quite concerned, actually, because the world's stability is clearly deteriorating. And you see this year that stability, security has already gone higher in priority than the climate transition. So, if we have a world where all sorts of pressures, perhaps including climate change, resources, political, ideological, God knows what you might have. Once we start shooting nuclear weapons at each other, I don't think many countries will be very focused on their climate transition. So in my view, global peace and stability is actually the bedrock of environmental governance on a global scale. So, if we want our children to have a proper world to live in, then, that's one extra reason to try to not shoot at each other.
Thank you. Anyone else commenting on that?
Yeah, good. Maybe generally, I would always say I fully agree to what Dimitri is saying. And on the other hand side, I always say whether these goals sound ambitious or not, I mean, the one thing we should always consider is that China has a very, very good track record on setting long-term goals and fulfilling those. So what Dimitri said initially, I do believe they take it absolutely serious. And as long as there's no big disturbance, like whatever kind of war in the surroundings, I do believe that China will just walk the talk and do what it said it will do.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lu, some comment?
Yeah, about the long-term targets, actually we are really cooperate with the research institutions, for example, the energy research institutions, to doing the long-term kind of a scenario modeling and to do the calculation. And I think it is true that the Chinese government has already thinking about how to, getting the target before the 2060 or before the 60 and 30. So I think they have the vision and they have their technology and they have to their policy. They are thinking about what kind of policy measures could have a positive influence for they getting the target, and what kind of technology, what different industries they are going to have the change solutions, and how can balance it between the energy supply and consumption. And I mean, all of this already in their concern and already in their researchers. So I think it won't be a big problem for the Chinese government to get in the target. And also, even I think the Chinese government also will say, yes, it is true that we're going to reaching the target in 2060, but actually, we kind of the government always earlier than the target year. Yeah.
Yeah, overperforming. Jiasheng, would you like to add something on that?
Actually, no more comments. I agree with Ms. Lu and gentlemen. In my mind, the balance the Chinese government is trying to reach, a lot of balances like GDP and pollution, and all these kind of balances is quite challenging for them. Yeah, it's really challenged, but I'm sure that they are going to reach it. Thank you.
Maybe one last word from my side, because again, people are always looking into what's going on now and easily forget what happened in the past. I mean, a little bit more than 10 years ago, I was, let's say, involved with the photovoltaic industry in China, and I basically have seen their start and I've seen the rollout, and it was just mind-boggling. And at that time, in the years, let's say 2006, 2007 to 2010, there was basically more or less no installation in China at all of solar panels. Basically, they built up an industry in a pace which was mind-boggling, which already after 2 or 3 years could cover more than the demand of the whole world, just in production capacity. But at the same time, I mean, the country and the industry was able to produce solar panels at a price which was basically unimaginable before from a European point of view. I mean, solar power used to be something really expensive, yeah, and basically not really sustainable, not really economic. So within a very few years, China has changed when it comes to renewable energy, really absolutely the global game. And I think this is one of the things we should not forget. So I'm deeply convinced if China has that master plan and they want to do that, they will do that. And we will surely see a lot of other things which will surprise us in this respect.
Thank you very much. With this, I would like to close our panel. Thank you very much to all our panelists for this interesting and very active discussion. And I think we can continue later with the networking to really discuss about China's changing climate and industrial situation. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.